Hi, welcome to ASP.NET. This is Christian. In this video, let's go over the ASP.NET Web Forms page event lifecycle. This is a diagram that I put up to kind of show you how things flow behind the scene when you create an ASP.NET web page. So if you look at this diagram here, there's about like 10 steps in here, and this is not a complete a list of all the different steps, but these are some of the major important ones anyway. So when you create a ASP.NET Web Forms page, these happen behind the scene. Down here I have three more diagrams to show you. So on a typical ASP.NET page, you have three things going on. One of them is called the ASP page stages. So you have on the left column here, you have like the start, load, event handling, validation, and so on. So they have the stages. So the stage, you have different type of page methods. And then we have the page events. These orange ones here are the same ones I put up here in this diagram. I'm missing one step in here, which is the save state view, which is like right between here somewhere. But the orange ones are the page events, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And then, of course, you have your control events and control methods as well. The control here refers to like a particular tag, like a button tag or anything that is clickable on the page, right? Those will be your controls, and that actually occurs alongside the whole page event as well, but it has its own life cycle. So let's look at this. When you start your web page, when you load your page for the very first time, say you run it, or when a visitor comes to your page or site, it loads the page first time, right? It goes through this process down here. Maybe a little bit more familiar with this diagram here. So you have the HTTP request coming in. Assume that this is your web page, your window, and the user does something, either opens the site or click the event on the page, a button, then this step of events occur. Okay, it goes through the server, go through the initialization phase, and then it goes through this whole state here, and then the end, it renders the HTML back and then sends that data back to the screen. The browser, we call this post back, because the data goes into the server and then the server posts the data back to the viewer. So now it sits in a waiting or listening state until something happens again. So the whole cycle process repeats itself every time you make a change to your web page, whether it's a refresh or a click on a button to change some data. It does that all the time. And there are some techniques that won't actually go through this whole process called AJAX, but typically this is how a web page flows. So when it goes to the initialization phase and then through these orange phases, so back up here, so it listens to the events, right? You load the page, you click an event, it goes to the pre-init event phase, then you will initialize anything you need to initialize on the page, like controls and things like that. Go through this three process here. I put an orange box here, going to show you that the initial control state are unchanged. And usually when you initialize some data, like you set the initial values, then those data are pretty much fixed, unless those data are static. And of course, but usually they are fixed. And so you're able to actually retain the original values if you needed to do some type of calculation. Otherwise, after that, any changes to a text field or a button or any things like that will be changed after the preload state. So it goes out here to preload. The loading and preload here means you're loading the data or any controls to the page only, the page object, not the actual web page yet. Okay, it's still happening behind the scene. It's going to build your control, whatever controls you have. Like if you have an HTML element tag for the H1 or any sub elements like the div tags or your web forms, all of those controls will be loaded to the page object, and then it will trigger any events if there is any at that time. If it's not, it will goes to the load complete, and it goes to the pre-render. Pre-render means it's going to ready to render the page. It's going to build the web page itself. So during this time, it's going to compile or transfer or kind of like reload, recreate the DOM tree from the ASP controls to HTML, and it renders it, and then it sends it back out to the user and unloads here. I mean, it removes that from memory, from RAM. So now it just sits there as a plain HTML document, and the whole cycle gets repeated. Okay, so again, I put 10 steps here. There's more. One of the important steps is this step called the save state complete. This state here is very important. It retains your state. When we talk about state, we're talking about the actual data of a certain variable or certain fields. Okay, those are called state. So let's go back to the code here, and I will show you what I have here. I set up a file. I called this the lifecycle ASPX file, and in here in this page I have just 3 controls. One for input. This is a regular HTML element. You see, this is nothing has to do with it does not go back to the engine, so it doesn't get compiled and re-rendered by ASP engine, because it's just a pure HTML element. So I call this a stateless. Then we have a ASP server control. Any ASP server control is tagged with the ASP keyword, followed by a colon, followed by the name of that control. Okay, there's a host of them. These are really related to HTML elements. If it's a text box, then what you'll get is actually an input tag. When the ASP engine renders it, it builds the web page, it will convert this to an input tag. Okay, so this runs on the server. As you can see, there's a run at attribute that sets the value to server. If you don't have this attribute, then this is just really nothing, right? It's just a simple, it's like an HTML element, but it's an invalid HTML element, because when ASP looks at this file, looks at this line, and it knows that, oh, this is an ASP tag, but then it checks it whether it runs on a server or not. If there is none, then it will just ignore that line. Okay, so it's important to make sure you also have this attribute is set to run at server. Then I have a text field. Let me close this. A text attribute that says "Hi Earth." It's just the actual text you see in that box. And I just noted here that I said this is a stateful because it's retained by the ASP server. And then I have a button here is also run on a server, which means it's controlled by ASP as well. And I make that a event button. As you can see, I have a click event that updates the click. So this page here is a really simple page. Now the code behind file, this file right here, which is right here, okay, it applies to that HTML page. So here I have a list of all the 10 steps I showed you earlier in that diagram. They don't have to be in this order. I just put them in this order so it's easier to visualize it, but it doesn't really matter the order because it will be rendered in the correct order anyway. But here at the top we have the pre-init. So you see they have a page underscore pre-init. This is convention. This is again something built into ASP. So if you want to override this function, this method, you can by prepending the actual event with the page underscore. Okay, so now I can actually do things inside this event, this phase. So I'm just basically writing some data to the output screen. So because this is an ASP file, .NET web page, you don't have access to the console anymore. So if you were to write the console.write line, it's not going to work. And so that's why I write to the debug write line, and it will output that to the output window. We'll see that like right down here. You see these are the output window here. I'm going to clear that for now. Okay, so when I run this file, I'm just going to go through the whole steps here. I just put the step 1, step 2, and the name of each of those functions. And I also output the actual value from the text field from here. This text box here has the ID of text input, and I'm going to grab the text element, the text attribute, which is it will say hi earth initially, and output that as well to the output window. So the step 2, step 3, and so as we move through these phases, you see how these data actually change through each phase. And between steps 5 and 7, I have step 6 called the control events. Okay, if I go back, that's this state right here in the event handling. Okay, as you can see in the orange phase, it goes through all these steps and it's kind of skip that control events, and it goes right into the load complete. Okay, and that is this control events here. If there's no click event or something like that, it will just bypass that right into the load complete. And that's why I put the step 6 here. Later I'll show you what that means. And then it goes all the way through step 10 and then unload. Okay, once it's unload, again, it releases everything from memory, and the data is now been rendered on the web page back to the user so they can see on the web page. Okay, so now I'm going to run this file and we'll see what that looks like. So you have to run through the debug to see the output. Okay, it's debugging. And I'm going to put this on the side. And let me open the, once it's loaded, I'll open the output window so we can see them. Okay, notice I'm loading the page for the first time. This is the same thing as a user comes to your page and view this page for the first time. So when that happens, in the output window, you see that it has a collection of information here, right? So the first thing it loads is the step 1 in this order. And then you see that the text is going to say hi earth from this field all the way through these phases. What you don't see here is stage 6, step 6. Again, that's because we did not click the button yet. Once I click the button, then it's going to go to step 6. Okay, when that happens, it's going to do everything again. All the steps from 1 all the way to 10, including 6. Okay, so now watch what happens when I click the update. The update doesn't do anything other than just calling a function right in here. I just call this update click event. It's an event because of this signature here. It would just output step 6, start, the click OK, the function. I should say update or click here, but and then outputs the data, which is the same data, and then it ends that and it continues down the list. Okay, so here we go. Okay, that's really quick, right? It loads it again. This is the first step, as you can see if I scroll up. This is the initial one. This is after I click the event. Okay, so you see that when I click the event, it goes through here and then it adds step 6 in here. Okay, so we have the click event, and then the data goes down the way and things remains the same. Okay, hi earth is still the same. Now watch this when I'm going to change this hi earth to something else. Let me put something like 2 here, right? And I click update and reload. Okay, it goes through the whole process. It's down here. That's that third time this time. So you see that the first 3 stages, 1, 2, and 3, it still says hi earth, hi earth, hi earth. This is the pre or the initialization phase. After the preload or that one, it changes to earth 2 thereon. Okay, so it doesn't happen. It doesn't start on step 6. You may wonder, you may think that it does, but it is not. Okay, in step 6, as you can see, you can of course do things with it in step 6, but the data changes and it retains the data afterwards. So the initialization part, as you can see, it still retains its original data, which was just hi earth. Okay, so this is what's called a stateful page in ASP.NET. because it's able to retain the data without me having to do any code at all inside the page here. As you can see, I did not reassign the data to the input box. It just retains it. And if you type something else, if I replace that hello earth, it will stay at that state. And you can see the data changed. But then, of course, the initial data will still remain the same. But the thing is that this text has been changed. Now compare with the stateless. If I put something here, if I say Java and earth2, okay, if I click upload and update, you see that this one here, it does not retain its data. And this is because HTML or the HTTP protocol is stateless. And because it's stateless, you have to find a way, a mechanism to retain those data, especially if you want to retain those data and you want to pass this data over to a different page. This is very common in, web forms, or you have some type of registration form that would pass the data one page to another page and so forth. So there are, other ways to retain those. You can use like, cookies or, local storage or something like called a session if you're using the backend site, back server programs like ASP or PHP and so on. Okay, so the ASP has a way to retain your data, and this is called the view state. So if you do a source view on this page, make it a little bit bigger here so you can see, do a source view, and there is an object called name called view state, and this view state has a value that has a string of gibberish characters. Okay, this is a special character. It's hidden. You can't tell what it is, but it's like a hash table that will keep track of every element on your page that has this attribute called run as server. And it's an ASP control that runs on a server. Okay, like this one here, this button here, same thing. If I have some text to the button, I can update the text to something else. Instead of saying update and reload, I could have the code behind file to change its text to something else completely, and it will retain that data. Okay, so that's how you're able to see this state. So during a post back meaning I reloaded the same data back to the same page, the data remains, and that's because of this view state. Now, the more you have, the more of this control you have, then this gonna grow. This will grow. This value will grow to a really large value. Because it will grow, that means your file will grow dynamically behind the scene. And when that does happen, then it's gonna slow down the page load. And so there is a trade-off between having all these state and then all these non-state data. So when you do something like this, you want to kind of think, do I need to retain this data or I don't? Okay, if you do, then do so. Otherwise, then don't use that stateful method, because you can still restore the data through JavaScript, right, or through local storage, or maybe through using the session variables inside ASP as well. Okay, so that is the life cycle. It goes through this whole process, and hopefully that you'll get to see what it looks like behind the scene. And because you have access to these phases, you can do certain things before some things happen, right? So before the page load, you could add controls to the page before it loads to the page, and then you can manipulate your page before it actually renders to the HTML, to the DOM tree as well. Okay, so if you have any questions about this life cycle, please let me know, and I'll be more happy to explain a little more in details. Thank you.